Breaking news. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, under a copper-colored dawn that barely pierced the Harmattan haze, residents along the eastern corridor of the capital watched in stunned silence as a massive military convoy rolled across the asphalt with mechanical precision. Flatbed carriers groaned beneath the weight of armored vehicles wrapped in desert camouflage. Fuel tankers, satellite trucks, mobile command units, and artillery systems moved in disciplined formation, their passage announced by the low thunder of diesel engines and the rhythmic chop of escort helicopters overhead. The convoy, which security officials later described as part of a strategic reinforcement deployment, entered Burkina Faso yesterday afternoon through multiple secured routes, converging gradually toward key military installations on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Witnesses described the procession as the largest single movement of military hardware the country has seen in over a decade. "It felt like the earth was shaking," said Issa Ouedraogo, a shopkeeper who closed his roadside kiosk as the armored carriers passed. But there was no panic. People stood and watched. Some even applauded. The Ministry of Defense confirmed the arrival of advanced logistical and defensive equipment, but stopped short of detailing the full inventory. Unofficial sources, however, indicate the convoy includes mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, long-range surveillance drones, counter-battery radar systems, and mobile field hospitals, a sign not merely of preparation for combat, but of anticipation of prolonged engagement. Across social media, the phrase "Black Winter" trended within hours. Though not formally defined by authorities, the term has been circulating in security briefings for weeks. Analysts interpret it as shorthand for a projected surge in militant activity during the dry season, when armed groups historically intensify operations due to improved mobility across arid terrain. Burkina Faso has endured years of insurgent violence in its northern and eastern regions. Entire communities have been displaced, trade corridors disrupted, and agricultural cycles destabilized. Yet what distinguishes the current moment, observers say, is the government's refusal to frame the crisis solely through the lens of counterterrorism. In recent addresses, state officials have emphasized that national security and economic transformation are parallel imperatives. While reinforcing forward bases and expanding rapid response units, the administration has simultaneously accelerated infrastructure projects, new textile processing hubs in Bobo Dioulasso, expanded irrigation networks in the Bouclés du Mohon region, and the construction of modular industrial parks designed to attract regional manufacturing partnerships. Finance Minister Amadou Traoré, speaking last month before the National Assembly, articulated the policy bluntly: security is necessary, but security without prosperity is fragile. We will not suspend development because of violence. We will build while we defend. This dual-track strategy is visible even in the composition of the convoy itself. Alongside armored personnel carriers were earth-moving machines and prefabricated housing units destined for reconstructed towns in conflict-affected provinces. Engineers in reflective vests were seen consulting digital tablets beside soldiers adjusting turret mounts, an image that encapsulated the government's narrative: reconstruction and resistance advancing together. At the port of Tema in neighboring Ghana, where part of the equipment reportedly transited before entering Burkina Faso by rail and road, shipping logs show an unusual uptick in heavy-lift cargo over the past 2 weeks. Regional diplomats declined to confirm whether foreign partners supplied the weaponry, though analysts suggest the systems appear compatible with multiple international manufacturing standards. Military experts note that the integration of counter-drone technology and mobile air defense units indicates a shift in doctrine. Armed groups in the Sahel have increasingly adopted commercially modified drones for reconnaissance and improvised explosive delivery. By deploying sophisticated jamming arrays and thermal detection systems, Burkina Faso appears to be preparing for a technologically evolving battlefield. Yet for many citizens, the spectacle of armored columns is secondary to a more pressing concern: daily survival. At a bustling market in Kaya, traders discussed not the caliber of artillery but the price of millet and cooking oil. "If the roads are safe, business returns," said Mariam Sawadogo, arranging baskets of tomatoes under a patched awning. "We don't need speeches. We need trucks moving again." Road security remains central to the government's calculations. Insurgent attacks on convoys have strangled supply lines, isolating towns, and inflating commodity costs. Officials say part of the newly arrived equipment will fortify transport corridors, creating protected transit zones monitored by aerial reconnaissance. In the northern province of Somme, where entire villages have been abandoned in recent years, local administrators confirmed plans for phased resettlement. The convoy includes water purification systems and modular solar grids intended to power reopened clinics and schools. Teachers, many of whom fled after threats from militants, have begun receiving conditional deployment notices tied to improved security guarantees. International observers are cautiously optimistic. The African Security Research Institute released a statement acknowledging a notable recalibration in strategic planning, highlighting the integration of civil engineering assets into military logistics. However, it warned that hardware alone cannot resolve the root drivers of instability, including youth unemployment and regional inequality. That reality has not been lost on policymakers in Ouagadougou. In parallel with the convoy's arrival, the Ministry of Industry unveiled incentives for domestic metal fabrication firms to supply components for armored vehicle maintenance. The initiative aims to cultivate a local defense support ecosystem, reducing dependence on imported spare parts and fostering skilled employment. University campuses have also felt the ripple effects. Engineering departments report increased enrollment in mechanical and aeronautical programs, fueled partly by scholarship schemes tied to national reconstruction projects. Students want to be part of rebuilding the country, said Professor Bintou Diallo. They see opportunity in adversity. Still, tension hums beneath the surface. Security checkpoints have multiplied across major intersections in the capital. Nighttime patrols sweep residential districts with heightened frequency. Helicopters, once rare overhead, now trace looping arcs across the skyline after dusk. Residents speak of a strange duality, a city investing in fiber optic expansion and startup incubators while simultaneously bracing for intensified conflict. Construction cranes rise beside sandbagged perimeters. Billboards advertising agro-processing expos share visual space with public service announcements urging vigilance. In Parliament, opposition figures have pressed for transparency regarding the cost of the new equipment and the terms of any procurement agreements. Defense officials insist that financing structures are sustainable, combining state revenue with reallocated budget lines and strategic partnerships. Economists note that Burkina Faso's gold exports have provided critical fiscal breathing room. Revenues from mining have underwritten both military spending and rural electrification projects. The government has pledged to channel a fixed percentage of extractive income into a sovereign development fund, insulating key programs from volatility. The phrase "Black Winter" continues to spark debate. Some view it as a psychological rallying cry, a stark acknowledgement of looming hardship intended to galvanize unity. Others fear it may inadvertently amplify anxiety. Yet reports from remote villages indicate sporadic skirmishes persist. Communications remain patchy, and humanitarian agencies warn that displacement numbers could climb if hostilities escalate. Relief organizations are pre-positioning food stocks in anticipation of possible blockades. Diplomatic channels across West Africa are active. Regional security blocs have convened closed-door sessions assessing cross-border coordination. Intelligence sharing mechanisms are reportedly being upgraded to track militant movement patterns that ignore national boundaries. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou's industrial zone, factory floors hum with renewed activity. Textile looms clatter late into the night, producing uniforms and civilian garments alike. Small manufacturing enterprises, encouraged by tax incentives, are scaling up production of agricultural tools destined for resettled farming communities. It is within this convergence of steel and soil, of armored convoys and irrigation canals, that Burkina Faso's current chapter unfolds. The state's insistence on industrialization amid insecurity challenges conventional narratives that equate conflict with stagnation. Officials argue that surrendering development timelines would hand insurgents a symbolic victory. As twilight descended over the capital yesterday, the final segments of the convoy cleared the eastern bypass. Floodlights illuminated storage depots where cranes carefully offloaded armored hulls. Mechanics in grease-stained overalls circled the vehicles, conducting preliminary inspections beneath the glare of portable lamps. From a nearby overpass, clusters of residents watched the choreography below. Some recorded videos on their phones, others simply stood, arms folded, contemplating what the coming months might hold. No official declaration has defined the parameters of the so-called Black Winter. There is no published timetable, no explicit threshold that will mark its arrival. Instead, there is movement, steady, deliberate, unmistakable movement, of machinery, personnel, and policy converging toward an uncertain horizon. In the rural north, farmers preparing their fields speak of resilience rooted in generations of adaptation to drought and hardship. In the capital's policy circles, strategists pore over maps and economic forecasts, seeking equilibrium between defense and development. As night deepened and the hum of engines gradually subsided, a final column of transport trucks approached the secured perimeter. Their cargo, shrouded in heavy tarpaulins, remained undisclosed. Soldiers signaled them forward through reinforced gates, and the convoy disappeared behind layers of concrete and steel. Beyond those gates, preparations continue, not only for confrontation, but for construction, for the reopening of corridors long shuttered, for the recalibration of a nation determined to shape its trajectory despite gathering clouds. And in the quiet that followed the day's thunderous procession, officials convened emergency briefings to evaluate intelligence intercepts suggesting unusual movements along the tri-border region, reports that could redefine the scope of operations in the days ahead as additional units stand ready to deploy toward the fragile frontier where Burkina Faso's borders brush against Niger and Mali, a stretch of scrubland and riverbeds that has become one of the most volatile corridors in the Sahel. In secure rooms lit by muted screens and digital terrain maps, senior commanders reviewed satellite imagery streamed from newly activated reconnaissance systems believed to have arrived with the convoy. Analysts traced faint thermal signatures across arid expanses, comparing them against previous movement patterns attributed to insurgent cells. The images suggested logistical buildup beyond Burkina Faso's territory, temporary encampments, supply caches, and what appeared to be motorcycle concentrations typical of rapid strike formations. While officials refrained from public alarm, internal memoranda reportedly urged heightened readiness levels. Air assets were placed on standby. Rapid deployment brigades were ordered to maintain immediate mobility status. In the capital, military police discreetly secured strategic intersections without disrupting civilian flow. Despite the visible reinforcement of national defense, daily life in Ouagadougou refused to pause. Motorbikes weaved through traffic beneath the lingering echo of rotor blades. Street vendors shouted over honking taxis. Students in crisp uniforms hurried toward evening study sessions powered by newly installed solar streetlights, part of a rural electrification program that has quietly expanded even as security spending rises. Observers note that Burkina Faso's current trajectory is defined by a paradox rarely sustained in conflict zones: escalation without economic paralysis. Rather than shuttering industrial projects, the government has doubled down on them. Construction of agro-processing plants continues at accelerated pace. Export documentation offices report an increase in processed goods shipments compared to raw commodity exports, reflecting a broader ambition to shift up the value chain. The symbolism is not lost on citizens. "We are defending the country, yes," said a civil engineer overseeing roadworks near Kédougou. "But we are also laying foundations. If you only fight, you survive. If you build, you transform." Security experts caution that transformation is contingent on sustained stability. Yet the integration of development planning into military logistics has altered the tone of national discourse. In official briefings, phrases like economic sovereignty and industrial resilience accompany references to counterinsurgency doctrine. International markets are watching closely. Gold prices fluctuate, but Burkina Faso's output remains robust, providing fiscal leverage. Negotiations with regional trade partners signal intent to expand manufacturing exports beyond extractives. Economists argue that diversification may prove as critical to long-term security as armored vehicles. In northern provinces where insurgent influence once dictated daily rhythms, cautious re-entry programs are underway. Convoys similar to the one that stunned the capital have been spotted reinforcing smaller towns. Alongside troops, civil registry officials carry documentation kits to reissue lost identity papers. Health workers accompany patrols to reopen clinics. Agricultural advisors distribute improved seed varieties, encouraging displaced farmers to reclaim fallow land under protective escort. The arrival of advanced weaponry has inevitably drawn speculation about its origin. Regional analysts suggest a mosaic of procurement channels, some bilateral, others commercial. Though no single supplier has been publicly identified, the diversity of equipment implies deliberate diversification. Such a strategy reduces vulnerability to geopolitical pressure and ensures operational flexibility. Within the armed forces, morale appears cautiously elevated. Soldiers interviewed off-record describe the new hardware as confidence equipment, not merely tools of offense but instruments that level asymmetries in terrain and technology. Counter-IED vehicles equipped with reinforced hulls and signal jammers offer protection against roadside explosives that have inflicted heavy casualties in recent years. Enhanced communications arrays promise real-time coordination across dispersed units. Yet commanders emphasize discipline over spectacle. Public statements stress that technology complements, but does not replace, intelligence gathering and community cooperation. In villages near contested zones, outreach teams engage elders and youth leaders, seeking actionable information while offering assurances of protection. The humanitarian dimension remains delicate. Relief agencies continue to operate in high-risk areas, coordinating with military escorts where necessary. Warehouses in the Central Plateau now house emergency grain reserves in anticipation of possible supply disruptions. Aid coordinators acknowledge improved logistical coordination but warn that protracted conflict could strain capacities. In the capital's political sphere, debates intensify. Some lawmakers demand clear benchmarks for measuring the impact of the military buildup. Others advocate expanding vocational training linked to defense support industries. Parliamentary sessions stretch late into the night as budget reallocations are scrutinized. Citizens follow developments with a mix of resolve and apprehension. Radio call-in programs buzz with commentary. Some callers praise the government's refusal to suspend modernization efforts. Others question whether the scale of armament signals intelligence of an impending offensive by insurgent groups. At the heart of the tension lies uncertainty about timing. The term Black Winter lingers without formal definition, a metaphor hovering over public imagination. Meteorologically, the Sahel's dry season is predictable. Strategically, its implications are not. Historically, armed groups exploit dry terrain for mobility, launching raids that test supply lines and morale. Military planners appear intent on preemption rather than reaction. Reinforced outposts dot key corridors. Surveillance drones trace silent arcs across dusk skies. Logistics depots stockpile fuel and medical supplies to sustain extended operations if required. In Bobo Dioulasso, factory managers report uninterrupted production schedules despite heightened alert. Textile exports continue to flow. Local steel workshops have secured contracts to fabricate non-sensitive vehicle components, marking a subtle but meaningful step toward domestic capacity building. Young apprentices train alongside seasoned machinists, their livelihoods tied to the intersection of security and industry. Educational campaigns accompany the mobilization. Public service broadcasts encourage vigilance while discouraging rumor proliferation. Authorities stress unity, cautioning against narratives that exploit fear or sow division. Meanwhile, along remote desert tracks, reconnaissance patrols advance methodically. Intelligence sources suggest that militant factions are recalibrating in response to the visible influx of advanced systems. Intercepted communications reportedly reference altered tactics, including smaller decentralized units designed to evade detection. As night once again blankets the capital, floodlights illuminate not only armored silhouettes but cranes and scaffolding rising across industrial zones. The juxtaposition is striking, instruments of war parked beside tools of construction. It is a visual embodiment of a national thesis that security and development must advance in tandem. Diplomatic envoys arrive quietly, their visits unannounced but observed. Closed-door consultations explore expanded intelligence cooperation and economic partnerships. Burkina Faso's strategic position in the Sahel renders its trajectory consequential beyond its borders. On the streets, conversation turns to endurance. "We have seen difficult seasons before," said an elderly resident seated outside a tea stall near the central market. But this time, they are not waiting for trouble to knock. They are preparing. Preparation, however, does not eliminate risk. Sporadic clashes continue to flare in isolated pockets. Military communiques confirm limited engagements, emphasizing containment and territorial control. Casualty figures are withheld pending verification, underscoring the fog that accompanies even the most sophisticated deployments. Economic indicators offer tentative reassurance. Currency stability persists. Export pipelines remain functional. Infrastructure projects continue without major interruption. Analysts suggest that visible preparedness may deter opportunistic attacks on critical assets. Yet deterrence is a fragile calculus. It hinges on perception as much as capability. The convoy that entered Burkina Faso yesterday has already reshaped perception, domestically and regionally. Its scale signaled intent. Its composition suggested foresight. Its integration with development assets conveyed a broader narrative than mere militarization. As intelligence briefings extend into early morning hours, and as engineers resume work at construction sites beneath rising sun, the nation stands at an inflection point. The Black Winter, whether symbolic or imminent, looms as both challenge and catalyst. In secured hangars on the capital's outskirts, technicians finalize calibrations on systems newly unpacked from transit containers. Supply officers verify inventory against encrypted manifests. Commanders exchange updates with forward units positioned along contested corridors. And far beyond the capital's glow, where desert winds carve silent patterns across the Sahel, movement continues in shadows, unconfirmed, unannounced, yet undeniably sensed by those who study the terrain. Patrols adjust routes. Drones pivot midair. Communications crackle with fragments of intercepted chatter hinting at coordinated shifts just beyond visible range. For now, Burkina Faso advances along a narrow ridge between confrontation and construction, between uncertainty and ambition. The engines that roared through its streets yesterday have quieted, but the momentum they carried has not dissipated. It has dispersed, into command centers, factory floors, rural outposts, and the guarded hopes of a population determined not to let conflict define its future. And as fresh intelligence streams in from the northern arc late tonight, suggesting that several armed factions may be converging in a pattern unseen in previous seasons, security officials convene once more, maps illuminated, options weighed carefully, aware that the decisions taken in the coming hours could shape not only the trajectory of the Black Winter, but the long-term architecture of stability across the Sahel region as a whole. Across the long conference table inside the fortified operations center, the atmosphere shifts from analysis to calculation. Digital markers blink across a sprawling map of the Sahel, each representing a confirmed sighting, a suspected transit route, or an intercepted signal. The emerging pattern is neither random nor entirely predictable. It resembles a slow tightening of threads along porous borderlands, movements subtle enough to evade casual detection, yet deliberate enough to suggest coordination. Commanders speak in measured tones. The objective, they emphasize, is not dramatic confrontation but controlled containment. The new assets, freshly deployed and meticulously calibrated, allow for layered response strategies. Surveillance first. Disruption second. Engagement only when decisive. Beyond the capital, forward operating bases transition into heightened readiness. In the northern sectors, armored reconnaissance vehicles roll out before sunrise, their sensors scanning for irregular heat signatures against cool desert air. Drone operators monitor real-time feeds from mobile control units mounted on reinforced trucks that arrived within yesterday's convoy. The technology narrows uncertainty, but it does not eliminate it. In rural communities edging the conflict zones, elders convene under acacia trees to discuss the shifting security posture. The presence of uniformed patrols has grown more visible, yet so too have road construction crews and agricultural extension officers. Bulldozers flatten damaged routes once avoided for fear of ambush. Engineers install culverts designed to withstand seasonal flooding. The symbolism is quiet but powerful, permanence instead of retreat. At a vocational institute in Wahiguya, welding torches flare as apprentices practice fabricating structural components for modular housing destined for resettlement projects. The institute's director notes that enrollment has surged since the announcement of industrial incentives linked to national reconstruction. Young people want more than survival, he says. They want participation. Meanwhile, transport corridors that were previously considered high risk are now subject to synchronized escort systems. Convoys of commercial trucks move in timed intervals under aerial overwatch. The government hopes that re-establishing predictable trade rhythms will prevent economic stagnation from becoming a secondary casualty of insecurity. Yet intelligence updates continue to surface, hinting at evolving tactics among armed factions. Reports describe smaller units abandoning larger encampments in favor of fluid microcells designed to disperse quickly. The shift complicates traditional engagement models. Analysts adjust algorithms, recalibrating threat assessments in near real time. In Ouagadougou, the civilian mood oscillates between guarded optimism and cautious vigilance. Evening markets remain lively, though conversations often drift toward the north. Parents speak of contingency plans while encouraging children to focus on studies. Radio commentators debate whether the scale of preparedness indicates imminent escalation or strategic deterrence. At the Ministry of Economy, planners convene parallel sessions evaluating export resilience under various disruption scenarios. Diversification efforts intensify. Proposals circulate for expanding agro-processing clusters capable of absorbing raw harvests locally, reducing dependence on vulnerable transit routes. Industrial parks under construction receive accelerated funding disbursements to ensure operational readiness. Foreign observers quietly acknowledge the audacity of pursuing industrial momentum under looming threat. Historically, nations in similar circumstances have suspended development initiatives, funneling resources exclusively into security apparatuses. Burkina Faso's leadership, however, frames the two as inseparable pillars. Late into the night, communication hubs pulse with encrypted exchanges between regional partners. Cross-border intelligence sharing becomes increasingly granular. Patrol grids align across adjacent territories to minimize blind spots. The objective is collective situational awareness, recognizing that instability rarely respects cartographic lines. In the tri-border region, reconnaissance units confirm unusual logistical traces, abandoned fuel drums, temporary shelters recently dismantled, motorcycle tire imprints converging toward dry riverbeds. These signs do not confirm immediate confrontation, but they suggest preparation. Back in the capital's secured hangars, mechanics perform final diagnostics on counter-drone systems. Technicians review interference ranges, ensuring minimal disruption to civilian telecommunications. Precision is paramount, miscalculation could undermine public confidence. As dawn approaches, the first wave of reinforced patrols rotates into position along a corridor previously targeted by roadside explosives. The newly deployed vehicles, fortified against blast impact, advance cautiously yet steadily. Aerial feeds confirm clear passage. For local traders awaiting safe transit windows, each uneventful kilometer represents incremental restoration of trust. Humanitarian coordinators track population movements closely. Though no mass displacement has been reported in the last 24 hours, contingency stocks are redistributed closer to vulnerable districts. Field clinics receive additional supplies. Medical teams rehearse rapid response drills. In political circles, debate sharpens over transparency. Lawmakers request detailed procurement disclosures, mindful of fiscal accountability. Defense officials assure oversight committees that contractual obligations adhere to regulatory frameworks. The scrutiny, while intense, reflects institutional processes continuing even under heightened alert. Across social networks, imagery from the convoy continues to circulate, armored silhouettes against orange skies, soldiers silhouetted beside construction cranes. For some citizens, the images evoke reassurance, for others, unease. The narrative battle unfolds as vigorously online as along desert tracks. By mid-morning, reconnaissance drones detect movement near a cluster of rocky outcrops in the northern arc. The thermal signatures are fleeting, disappearing beneath natural cover. Command centers debate whether to deploy intercept teams or maintain surveillance. Patience prevails. Premature engagement could compromise broader containment strategy. The government's communications office releases a measured statement emphasizing preparedness, economic continuity, and national unity. It neither confirms nor denies specific intelligence reports, choosing instead to underscore resilience. Meanwhile, in a small town recently reconnected to the electrical grid, streetlights flicker on for the first time in months. Children gather beneath them, marveling at steady illumination. For residents, such moments symbolize more than infrastructure, they signal intent to reclaim normalcy. Military analysts acknowledge that the coming weeks may test the durability of this balanced approach. Sustained operations require logistical discipline and fiscal stamina. Yet the integration of industrial planning into defense logistics has introduced a degree of structural depth often absent in reactive campaigns. Evening descends again, and with it a palpable stillness. Patrol units report routine findings. No major clashes erupt. The anticipated convergence of armed factions remains speculative, yet credible enough to justify continued vigilance. In the operations center, senior officials revisit contingency matrices. Options are weighed: targeted disruption strikes, expanded corridor fortification, intensified community outreach. Each carries implications not only for security outcomes but for economic momentum. Outside, the capital breathes in a fragile equilibrium. Construction sites operate under floodlights. Freight trucks line up at inspection points, engines idling patiently. The hum of generators blends with distant rotor noise. The black winter, whether imminent storm or prolonged season of uncertainty, has already reshaped national posture. It has catalyzed unprecedented mobilization, but also reinforced a conviction that conflict need not eclipse ambition. As midnight approaches, fresh signals flicker across the monitoring screens, intermittent transmissions from an area previously quiet. Analysts lean closer, parsing fragments through layered encryption filters. The data is incomplete, but its timing is suggestive. Field commanders receive preliminary advisories. Units along the northern perimeter are instructed to maintain formation integrity and avoid overextension. Air reconnaissance assets adjust trajectories, sweeping broader arcs across darkened terrain. For now, no shots are fired. No official communiques announce engagement. Yet the atmosphere thickens with anticipation, as though the land itself waits. In homes across Burkina Faso, families retire under watchful skies, aware that the machinery of defense and development continues to turn through the night. Whether the coming days will bring confrontation or cautious calm remains uncertain. What is certain is this: the convoy that entered yesterday was not merely a procession of steel and engines. It was a declaration of posture, a signal that the nation intends to navigate the approaching season not with paralysis, but with preparation. And as another set of encrypted coordinates resolves into clarity within the dim glow of command screens, suggesting movement edging closer to a key supply artery, decision-makers draw measured breaths, poised to act in ways that could either diffuse the gathering tension, or ignite the first defining flashpoint of the long-anticipated Black Winter. The coordinates stabilize. What had first appeared as scattered anomalies now align into a slow, deliberate approach toward a strategic junction where two reinforced corridors intersect. The location is not symbolic, yet it is vital, an artery through which commercial convoys, fuel tankers, and agricultural shipments have only recently resumed consistent passage. Inside the operations center in Ouagadougou, the hum of processors deepens as analysts overlay terrain data with historical incident maps. Patterns from prior dry seasons flicker across adjacent screens. This time, however, the response grid is different. Layered patrols are already positioned. Surveillance coverage overlaps. Rapid response units sit within calculated distance. A decision is made, not for immediate confrontation, but for controlled presence. Armored reconnaissance vehicles adjust their vectors, advancing along parallel tracks rather than converging directly on the suspected movement. Above them, drones maintain altitude beyond audible range, relaying silent confirmation. The objective is containment without escalation, visibility without provocation. By dawn, patrol units establish a visible but measured perimeter around the junction. Commercial drivers approaching the checkpoint are screened efficiently, their documents verified, cargo inspected with scanning equipment newly integrated into mobile units. There is no panic. Traffic flows, albeit slower than usual. Word spreads quickly across transport networks, the corridor remains open. In nearby communities, residents observe the heightened activity with cautious interest. Farmers lead livestock toward watering points under the distant watch of armored silhouettes. School teachers reopen classrooms after brief consultations with local administrators. Life does not halt, it adjusts. Mid-morning reconnaissance confirms that the previously detected movement has dispersed. Whether deterred by the visible deployment or redirected elsewhere remains unclear. What is clear is that the anticipated convergence has not materialized into open engagement. Commanders interpret the development carefully. The absence of immediate confrontation does not equal resolution. Instead, it signals a shift in tempo, a contest of positioning and endurance rather than spectacle. Back in the capital, industrial cranes continue their arcs across construction sites. Welding sparks scatter across factory floors. At a newly expanded agro-processing plant, workers calibrate packaging lines destined for regional export. The machinery of development hums in parallel with the machinery of defense. Government officials release a concise statement reaffirming commitment to both security and economic transformation. There is no triumphant tone, no declaration of victory, only acknowledgement of vigilance and continuity. Analysts note that deterrence often manifests not in dramatic clashes but in the prevention of them. The visible readiness, the calibrated deployments, the integration of logistics and infrastructure, all combine to project stability as a deliberate stance rather than a fragile hope. As evening descends once more, patrol units rotate positions without incident. The strategic junction remains active, guarded yet operational. Traders report successful deliveries. Market stalls receive fresh supplies. Electricity flows uninterrupted to districts once accustomed to blackout anxiety. The phrase "Black Winter" lingers in public discourse, but its meaning begins to evolve. It is no longer solely a forecast of impending storm. It becomes a measure of preparedness, a test of whether resilience can outpace disruption. Within secured hangars, technicians power down systems for scheduled maintenance. In rural outposts, soldiers share quiet meals beside vehicles parked under starred skies. Across Burkina Faso, families gather for evening prayers and conversations about harvests, exams, and tomorrow's work. The convoy that entered days ago has dispersed into purpose. Its presence is now embedded across corridors, bases, and workshops, less spectacle, more structure. For now, the horizon holds uncertainty but not eruption. The land remains tense yet intact. The season ahead may still challenge endurance, yet the nation has signaled unmistakably that it will not retreat into paralysis. And so, as night settles over the Sahel and surveillance screens dim to standby glow, Burkina Faso stands poised, engines cooled but ready, factories lit, borders watched, awaiting whatever shape the coming winter ultimately decides to take.